What's going on, everybody? This is Afro Think Tank. Today we're going to talk about our critical systems in America and how they're straining and how we're on the precipice of collapse. Okay, and this has been in the works since Donald Trump first term. All right, but now we're getting to the point to where all of our systems are being stretched like a water balloon, right? And we're finding out through the greatest and most elaborate stress test a nation could possibly have what our institutions are made of, right? Because they're being stressed by the incompetence of this government, because we don't have professionals running the show, right? And I know this is the problem when you have uneducated voters voting, and it begs the argument that people shouldn't be allowed to vote unless they pass some sort of basic government test. Like voting, even though voting is a right, this is showing us that voting shouldn't. My opinion is voting maybe shouldn't be a right. Maybe it should be a privilege that you earn, right, through basic knowledge of how government works. Because it seems like we have so many uneducated voters who are voting as if they're rooting for their favorite football team, right? Instead of voting competent leaders whose job it is to run critical structures, right? And what we did was we put in a person who was grossly unqualified to run anything, and we made that person the leader of the United States of America. We made a person who has never demonstrated the ability to run any business or organization properly and responsibly. We made that person the president of the United States. We made a person who's cognitively compromised, who's criminally compromised, who's sexually compromised, who's socially compromised. We made that person the president of the most powerful institution in the world twice. That goes to show you the lack of intelligence that we have within our voting bloc. And that's the truth. And an unintelligent voting bloc is very dangerous because they can swing institutions, and they can swing the political sway left or right dramatically and destroy institutions that could take decades, if not centuries, to build. But it only takes a few actions and a few years to totally destroy. But people take the structures of the government and this complicated apparatus for granted, right? They take it for granted, right? And that's why they voted the most unqualified person ever in the history of politics into the highest office without any qualifications at all, right? Instead of voting in the most qualified person in the history of the presidency ever. Like if we were to make Donald Trump A and Kamala Harris B, and you didn't know which she looked like, didn't know if it was a he, didn't know if it was a male, female, black, white, Asian, and we just put up stats, accomplishments, and credentials, and we did it for both, there would be no one. There would be absolutely no one that would have ever picked Donald Trump. No one. He would have got not one pick from any rational human being. Even a semi-irrational human being would have got no picks, right? But because of all the inherent biases, racism and sexism that superseded common sense, we find ourselves in a situation where we have an authoritarian leader. And I know people say authoritarian, throw it around like maybe it's just a political shot, but it's legitimately an authoritarian leader. He's doing, by definition, what authoritarians do. And then behind him, because it's not so much Donald Trump, because Donald Trump is not smart enough to do any of this, but he's mean enough, he's apathetic enough to allow it all to happen, as long as he gets compliments, trophies, and he feels power, because he's like a child. He's a childlike mind, right? So he allowed all the most evil people in the world to be behind him. Like, for instance, the guy that wrote Project 2025. He is he's in charge of the finances of America, and he's doing everything Project 2025 said he was going to do. Now, if Donald Trump was a Russian asset, right? Let's say if he was a Russian asset, everything that he's doing right now, as far as stressing out the public, right? purposely making healthcare and people's premiums go up. Why would any president do that? Why would any president purposely make it so people's premiums go up? Why would any president and any administration allow him to impose tariffs, which are a tax on the American people, not a tax on any other country? Why would any rational administration ever allow that to happen on such a massive scale? Why would any American administration allow our farming industry to be defunded? Why would they allow our farmers, right, who make most of their money by selling their products overseas to various different countries? Why would he create an environment to where they are no longer getting that business from those countries anymore? Despite the tariffs, right, the farmers are no longer able to sell their products to other countries, opening up markets and giving other countries opportunities who otherwise wouldn't have had those opportunities, because we no longer are a viable source for those resources we used to sell, right? Plus, the attitude and the posture of his white supremacy administration has turned off and is off-putting to other nations who are all not white supremacists because they're not white, right? So you destroy our food industry. You destroy every single business because of tariffs, which is a tax on the importer of America, not a tax on any other corporation or country outside of America, because any basic business, the business will always pass its overhead along to the customer, period. That's why all of our prices are going up. So the people's food are more expensive, right? Rent is more expensive. Healthcare is becoming more expensive. So the person that's supposed to be taking care of America is stressing every single American out collectively, to the point to where white people, who usually would allow this to happen to black people, because it's always happening. That's why black people in this environment are coping much better than most people, because we've always had these austerity measures placed upon us. We've always been tariffed. We've always been over-policed. We've always had our farmers have always been disenfranchised. Our farmers have never got the subsidies the white farmers have got. So we are used to this environment, right? And we're not surprised at this environment. We know how to cope and manage within this environment because we had to create the apparatuses to survive in this environment that these white institutions have created and placed us in and keep us in. But now you have a white supremacist administration that doesn't do the basic thing white supremacy is supposed to at least do, and that's take care of the white people. They're not even doing that. So that just goes to show you that this is well beyond white supremacy. This is definitely authoritarianism. So this is dictatorship. So white people are now feeling what it is black folks have been feeling. Now everybody collectively, right? Everybody collectively are dealing with the shits, from big businesses to small businesses. And the only businesses that benefit is big oil, right? And those businesses that benefit from forced billing cycles, that things we have to pay, like utilities, right? Like the 5 different wholesaler food distributors who know no matter what we got to eat. So guess what? No matter how expensive the food is, you have to buy it. Therefore, no matter how angry you are, you still got to take your angry ass to that grocery store, and you still got to feed yourself with the same amount of food, or at least close to it, that you've been doing it. Whether you can pay your rent or not, you still got to go to the grocery store and eat, or you will die, right? You still got to pay that rent or that mortgage, or you will be homeless. Therefore, certain institutions win, right, during these type of crises. But the majority of businesses, right, businesses who create things, who produce things, who have to import packaging, import certain items to create their items, right? Even if they make it here in America, they still have to import certain products, certain non-finished products to finish the product here. So it's impacting so many different institutions within America that is stressing those things out, right? The people themselves are stressing out. That's why you got more mass shootings, right? You got more white folks flipping out, right? You got more businesses collapsing and closing, right? Because he fired the government. Like, listen, the government. He's stressing out the government. They call those bureaucrats, non-elected government officials. You mean like government workers who keep the government running and operating smoothly. Just like when Elon Musk fired all those people at Twitter, what happened to Twitter? It became trash, right? Trump did the same thing. Fired all the government people, the government became trash. That means the government services are not operable the way they used to be. They're not smooth. They don't run like they used to run, right? And things take longer, like the VA. The VA takes longer. For instance, if I want to make an appointment, I just made an appointment, right? My appointment ain't until February. I have to wait that long for an appointment. That's ridiculous. But because Donald Trump fired so many people who worked at the VA is stressed. So every institution that takes care of Americans is stressed. And at some point, they will break, right? We have institutions that are breaking. And a lot of these institutions support other institutions because everything is connected, right? So if there's not people working at these government buildings downtown, right? That means the restaurant that used to support all the government workers that would go have lunch, they no longer have the customers. If you make it a hostile situation for tourists, for people to come in to visit the country, people don't visit America, right? So then you see no one coming in. That means those restaurants and all those shops that used to sell products to tourists, they don't make money, right? So they start to lose their businesses and they can't pay the commercial rent in that commercial place. So that means if they can't pay the rent, that means the commercial real estate owner doesn't get a profit. You see how it breaks down? Because people have other alternatives than coming to America, right? Like, for instance, look at Florida. No one wants to visit Florida because of the hostile situation in Florida, right? So Florida is not raking in the money it would for tourism like it used to. So people are going to different places like California, right? They'll go to California or they'll go to the Caribbean. Other countries that can provide the same vacation services, right, with a better attitude towards foreigners, right? So nothing Donald Trump is doing is benefiting him. If he was a Russian asset and his job was to destroy America by breaking down his institutions systematically, he will be doing an amazing job. But if he's not a Russian asset, everything that Donald Trump is doing will be exactly what a Russian asset who ascends to the presidency of the United States would do. Everything that's happening here is exactly what any opposition government would love to do if they could get somebody who worked for them in the White House. So whether he's a Russian asset or not, it doesn't matter to the end user, which is us, who have to suffer the consequences of an inept government. And I'm hoping that some people who took the government and how it operated for granted are hoping they're having a little appreciation for the way we've been running things with competent leaders, whether they're Democrat or Republican. Competent leaders, people who are lawyers, people who've been governors and mayors and senators, people who are career politicians. You're not supposed to like your politician because you can have a beer with him. You're not supposed to be able to comprehend your politician because he speaks to have the same vocabulary as you. You don't want your politician who's supposed to be leading you to be somebody you can have a beer with. You know what I'm saying? Not really. You want him to be excellent. You want him, somebody you can look up to. Somebody that when they talk, right, you're like, wow, I didn't know what he said. He said that and it sounded real smart. You want somebody like that. Donald Trump is the opposite of all of that, right? But people voted for him because he sounded like him, which was weird because you're talking about a rich New York millionaire, never a billionaire, but he called himself rich New York millionaire who's a fake billionaire, the literal enemy of the so-called people who call themselves MAGA, right? They hate those New York rich guys who look down on the little guy, but somehow they convinced themselves that this guy was going to be for them, right? And because of the irresponsibility of the voters, right, and the cognitive dissonance that they placed themselves in to not realize what's happening and allow it to happen, right, we find ourselves in a situation. It's also stressing out our political process because we see all these supposed rational politicians who are career politicians. We see how they kowtow towards, authoritarianism very easily. Like Donald Trump, every Republican should be getting impeached by the Republican Party. Article 25 or some shit like that? They should be trying to eliminate him out of office. He has done so many things to disqualify himself, and the government has shown that they will do nothing. Even when the Democrats had a chance to do something, they tried to take the political high road and didn't do anything. So as a result of them not taking any action, we allowed Donald Trump to even be qualified to run for the office. Because the justice system decided they didn't want to set a precedent and prosecute a president, they allowed him and his criminality, they still allowed him to become the president. So our judicial institutions failed us, right? Our political institutions failed us, right? Our business institutions failed us because they took the profit Donald Trump potentially was going to give them, right, over the people who they serve, right? Because corporations, their whole thing is make money and F everybody else. But there should be some level of corporate patriotism that doesn't seem to exist, right? And clearly, there are countries that have more priorities over the American people, right? So all of our institutions that we look up to or look to keep this thing we call the United States of America together and operating are all being stressed out by the personal ambitions of individuals and the weakness of individuals to do their job, or the weakness of individuals to have some sort of humility or to have some kind of integrity. All these people who are supposed to have integrity, who took oaths, have decided that it's more important to save oneself, more important to not stick out because they don't want to get in trouble. They don't want to get blackballed. They don't want to be a part of it. They want to make sure they're still a part of the club after everything is said and done, right? Now we have literal Gestapo police officers running around with masks, racially profiling people as a matter of policy, all right? Something that years ago we would have shunned. But right now, as a matter of policy, we have fat, out-of-shape white men enjoying themselves running around America, gathering up as many black and brown people as they possibly can. And when all this is over, all those thousands of white men who were empowered by bonuses from this white supremacist administration, all these guys, they will get away with it. No one would be held accountable. And I don't see how our political institutions will ever hold any other leader accountable, because the president has said you didn't do anything for when Donald Trump did all of these things that warranted not only an impeachment, but warranted jail. Donald Trump deserves to go to jail. France, all right, another white supremacist global institution, at least they just prosecuted their former president. They found the political will and the political balls to prosecute their former president, and he's going to jail for 5 years. Other European countries and Asian countries and African countries have found a way, political will, to prosecute their former presidents and former prime ministers for the crimes they committed while they're in office. Yet the United States of America, the pillar and the example of a government, the supposedly example of a first world nation, can't find a way to do it themselves because they don't want to set a precedent to where they also can get in trouble, because because once you say a president can go to jail, now every president can go to jail for the things that they do if they do something wrong. Now every senator can be impeached. There was a time where we would impeach a senator for saying certain things out their mouth. How many times have we seen senators have to step down? Congressmen have to step down because they said a few words that were uncouth, that were unprofessional. Now, we got this white supremacy administration where everybody is just saying the most egregious things, doing the most egregious things, no accountability. And like I said, there will be no accountability after this election. These white people in masks, these police, they will disappear in the ether. And you will never know that they were a part of this white supremacist administration. 10 years of terror on America that they got participated in, and that they got paid with the taxpayers' money. They got paid to be able to terrorize these white fat men who are part of local law enforcement, who do not have the training to be federal law enforcement agencies, got to run around here and jump out boys and snatch up and grab people without people having due process. They will not be held accountable. And it's unfortunate that we live in a country like that, that's supposed to be the example for the rest of the world. So yeah, we're having major issues. And I'm going to let this lady speak on this even further. And she'll tell you how all our systems are being stressed out. And you must believe it can collapse. It has happened before, where countries that were once initial, I guess you would want to consider first world nations, pillars of the global community, collapsed totally because of racism, misogyny, because of greed, because of criminality, unchecked criminality, right? And it only takes You know, how long does it take to build a building? How long does it take to destroy a building? You understand? So, you know, take that how you will, right? Being in the denial doesn't stop what's happening in real life happen. And most people are unprepared and not ready for what's about to happen. Because come January, everybody in America is going to have to fuck around and find out the results of the election that Pat we're going to do really, because you ain't felt it yet. Come January, everybody's going to feel it. Everybody's going to feel it. And at that point, it might be too late. But we don't know. Because the government, because we're right now, we're part of that stress test. What are we going to do? How much is it going to take before people start getting out here getting even more violent? You understand what I'm saying? So anyway, y'all tell me what y'all think in the comment section. It's Afro Think Tank. Learn something, teach something. I'm out.
Okay, strap in for this one, y'all. I am not an economist, but I have studied complex systems for years, and the science here is well established. What we're seeing right now is multiple critical components of our economic and political network showing simultaneous strain. Think of it like a rubber band. It stretches and holds tension, and then it snaps suddenly. That snap is what complexity scientists call a mixed transition. You can cross the threshold before the visible collapse happens, but once you've passed that point, the failure cascade becomes extremely difficult, if not impossible, to stop. With the government shutdown that went into effect October 1st, food price surges, over 30,000 jobs lost in the latest ADP report, with previous months revised downward, and all the other factors that we'll discuss, I believe we're approaching, if we haven't already crossed, that threshold. I could be wrong about timing or even whether we reach full transition, but the pattern is concerning enough that understanding what's happening really matters. Zoom out a bit and think about the US as an extremely complex system made up of other complex systems. We're talking 330 million people, trillions in daily transactions, massive supply chains, massive global markets, all interconnected. Usually that complexity makes us resilient, but under the right or the wrong conditions, it becomes our biggest vulnerability. Failure cascade is how complex systems most often collapse. All the interconnections that are efficient in average circumstances become highways for problems to spread. One disruption triggers the next, like a line of dominoes, and it amplifies as it goes. There's something more abrupt than cascading failure, and this is called the mixed transition. This is what keeps complexity scientists up at night. Here's how that works. So, tiny failures accumulate invisibly throughout the system. Everything looks fine on the surface, but you hit a critical threshold, and suddenly, even a small shock causes the whole thing to transform. And the scary part is once it starts, you can't reverse it because the underlying structure has fundamentally changed. The warning signs are increased variance in measurements, systems taking longer to recover from shocks, events becoming more correlated, and flickering between stable and unstable states. And so I think this sounds familiar to all of us in the US right now. Since 2020, we've been accumulating what researchers call failure drift, eroding trust, supply chain vulnerabilities, mounting debt, extreme partisanship, and repeated fiscal crises. But 2025 is qualitatively different. This administration isn't dealing with sequential challenges. They're simultaneously attacking multiple core systems at once. Direct interference with the private sector, institutional purges that destroy continuity, aggressive tariffs destabilizing the economy, cold shouldering allies, which leads to frayed, long-standing relationships, mass deportations, fracturing social cohesion, and now a government shutdown. In the financial system, bond markets are stressed. Foreign holders are nervous. The AI stock bubble has multiple burst triggers that are ready to go. Regional banks are still fragile from commercial real estate exposure. In the economy, unemployment is rising fast with major layoffs across sectors. Tariffs are driving business costs up 10 to 15% while destroying export markets. Housing foreclosures hit a 6-year high with 36,000 just in August. Healthcare premiums are about to explode, and federal revenue will collapse as the tax base shrinks. In government operations, the Treasury General account is depleting rapidly with no revenue replacement during the shutdown. They've got 156 billion in emergency funds that they can shuffle around, but that faces legal challenges and resource limits. Meanwhile, 20 of the 25 largest cities are facing deficits as they absorb the federal cost shifts from all the cuts. And as for the food system, it's getting critical. Agricultural exports are down 15% as China halted soybean purchases, and that's a 12.8 billion market that just gone. Farm bankruptcies in the first half of 2025 have already exceeded all of 2024. Grocery prices are rising over half a percentage point monthly, which is the fastest in 3 years. And then there's a predicted 7% holiday price shock that's coming. And we're already starting to see supply chain disruptions and restocking issues. The military, they're trying to politicize it with purges, loyalty tests, domestic deployment preparations. And here's what they don't seem to understand about that. This creates institutional resistance, not regime strength. Professional military culture actively opposes politicization. And here's the critical part in that point. This resistance creates additional unpredictability in the system. The regime can't reliably count on military compliance, which means they're operating with reduced information about their own capacity. And that's another form of system degradation that accelerates miscalculation. This extends to almost all the institutions they're purging right now during the shutdown. They've already begun that process, so they're not getting data back from those areas of government. And this complicates the data collection process. They won't actually know what's going on. When you're flying blind during a crisis, you make poorer decisions, which create more crises. To go back to the military, let's be honest that we're all thinking about the possibility of domestic military scenarios. And so let me explain why the math doesn't actually work on that. The US is 3.8 million square miles with 331 million people. Military units optimized for foreign combat cannot effectively occupy and control this territory during economic chaos. Significant domestic deployment costs over $20 million daily, completely unsustainable during revenue collapse. Economic collapse means military funding evaporates with the tax base. Security forces face the same personal economic hardships like foreclosures and unemployment as everyone else. So that reduces loyalty to a regime that's also causing their suffering. And the purges of experienced leadership created institutional opposition. Reports from the Quantico meeting this week show officers thinking about red lines and maintaining their apolitical bearing despite political pressure. Professional militaries resist politicization because it undermines mission effectiveness. Using force against economically desperate Americans would accelerate regime collapse, not prevent it. Argentina in 2001 proved this. Military repression during economic crises deepens instability rather than resolving it. Complex military systems also require functioning supply chains, advanced technology, and professional coordination. All of this is vulnerable to economic disruption. As infrastructure fails and logistics collapse, military effectiveness degrades regardless of political loyalties. Argentina had recent authoritarian experience, but their military still couldn't maintain control when unemployment hit 23%, 40,000 businesses shuttered, and the banking system collapsed. Mass protests drew hundreds of thousands despite violent repression, and the government fell. So, when might this mixed transition actually occur? It's dicey, but it could be even as short as 4 to 8 weeks. We've got a convergence right now: financial stress, food price spikes, government shutdown, and economic data blackouts. And the October food crisis hitting consumer budgets during a broader unemployment surge could be the tipping point. For the regime collapse, it could be 6 to 16 weeks at this point, with multiple factors accelerating simultaneously. Treasury depletion is the first domino, and they're burning through the general account with no revenue replacement during the shutdown. That 156 billion in emergency funds buys time, but not that much. Then there's the debt ceiling crisis looming. If we hit the ceiling during the shutdown with tanking revenue, we face potential default, and that triggers bond market panic. Foreign holders who own trillions in US debt start dumping bonds, and bond yields spike. That makes our debt service costs explode right when we can't pay our bills. Currency devaluation then follows. If bond markets lose confidence in US debt, then the dollar weakens. That makes imports more expensive, which accelerates inflation, which makes the food crisis worse, which triggers more social instability. Meanwhile, mass unemployment is rising as businesses are forced to make emergency cuts in staffing or even shutter. Food shortages are hitting. International pressure mounts as allies watch us destabilize. And this is when elite defection starts to accelerate. So, corporate leaders, major donors, even Republican officials, once the financial and political cost of continued support exceeds the benefit of staying loyal, they jump ship. And historically, that's when regimes collapse, not from the bottom up, but when the elites withdraw their support. Bottom line, by simultaneously destabilizing financial management, institutional continuity, economic stability, food security, and military professionalism, this administration has created cascading vulnerabilities that it cannot manage. They've essentially engineered their own downfall through reckless destabilization of the complex system that they sought to control. Be safe out there.
Free Sudan! Boycott diamonds and gold! Free Sudan! Boycott diamonds and gold! We most definitely cannot forget about the people of Sudan.
Thanks for watching Afro Think Tank. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. And follow me on Substack and Patreon for more content. Remember, it's Pan-Africanism or nothing.